Hey everyone, welcome back. You know, we love to get a little meta on this show. And, well, today we're diving into a topic that really makes you think about the future of how we communicate, even, the future of thought itself.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've got this listener, right? And they sent us this wild mix of research articles and even dystopian fiction.
Okay.
And it's all about this idea. What if AI could actually change the English language?
It's more than just like a fun thought experiment.
Right.
Because language is so fundamental to how we think, how we understand the world. And AI is already starting to kind of slip into those cracks.
Exactly. We're not just talking about AI as a tool to write better emails or whatever.
Yeah.
We're talking about AI potentially changing the very fabric of English itself.
Exactly. It's like if English is the operating system of human thought,
Okay, I like that.
then AI could become like the dominant software, shaping how that system functions, even evolving it in ways we can't fully predict.
And that actually reminds me of an article you sent over from Saman Maciejewski.
Yeah.
He uses this term, English 2.0, to describe this idea that English could become like a programming language for our minds.
Right. In a way, natural languages like English already function as a kind of code. We use words and grammar to convey meaning, to structure our thoughts.
Sure.
But Maciejewski's point is that AI could make those underlying rules even more explicit, more systematized.
So instead of just using English to talk about things, are we going to start using it more like a set of instructions to actually shape how our minds work?
That's the question, isn't it?
It's a bit unnerving when you think about it. We can't ignore the nuances, the ambiguities, the cultural influences that make English what it is.
Right, and that's where Noam Chomsky's work is so crucial. Natural language isn't just a set of rigid instructions. It's fluid, adaptable, deeply intertwined with human experience.
Exactly. It's messy and beautiful and sometimes makes absolutely no sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can't reduce language to a simple algorithm, no matter how powerful AI becomes.
Okay, so we've got this idea of English 2.0, right? But it made me think, is this just a new form of newspeak? Like in 1984, are we talking about subtle thought control here?
Yeah, I see where you're going with that.
Well,
and it's a concern worth addressing.
For sure.
I mean, on the surface, both newspeak and this idea of AI-improved English involve intentional language change.
Yeah.
But the underlying intentions, they're fundamentally different.
Right, because newspeak was designed to restrict thought, to limit what people could even conceive of.
Exactly. Whereas AI-improved English, at least in theory, aims to expand our capacity for thought, to facilitate communication and knowledge sharing on a global scale.
Okay, so it's the difference between limiting expression and maximizing it.
Exactly. Although, it's worth noting, with any powerful tool, there's always the risk of unintended consequences.
And speaking of unintended consequences, one of the articles you shared mentioned how some academic journals are getting really, really strict about AI assistance in writing. They're scrutinizing papers more closely than ever because they're suspicious of AI help. And get this, some authors are actually trying to dumb down their writing to avoid getting flagged. It's crazy. They're so worried about their work being too good, too polished, that they're purposely making it less sophisticated.
It's a really interesting and, kind of a bizarre parallel to the fear of complex language in 1984, isn't it?
It is. Okay, but on a more practical level, have you noticed AI's fingerprints on the way we write and speak? In that free write article, is AI going to change our vocabulary?
I actually have. And it's subtle, but it's there. Think about it. AI language models, they're trained on these massive data sets of text and code.
Right.
So they're really good at mimicking patterns, picking up on the statistical regularities of language, even if they don't fully grasp the meaning.
So it's more like pattern recognition than actual understanding.
Exactly. And that can lead to some quirks, like the overuse of certain words or phrases that the AI has identified as markers of, like good writing.
Like using the word delve way too often.
Or in conclusion.
Yes, or those super formal transitions that nobody actually uses in real life. It's like the AI has learned the rules, but not the exceptions,
Exactly, yeah. And it's not just about individual words or phrases either. It's also about the overall style, the tone, even the structure of writing.
So even if we're not consciously using AI to write, it's still shaping how we communicate, just by being out there in the world influencing these massive data sets.
It's a subtle influence, but a pervasive one. And it raises some fascinating questions about the future of language. As AI gets better at mimicking human language, does it even matter if it truly understands the meaning behind the words?
Right. It's at what point does the line between imitation and understanding become really, really blurry? And what does that mean for us, for how we interact with each other, with technology, even with ourselves?
Exactly. It challenges our assumptions about what language is, what it means to communicate. It's almost philosophical, isn't it?
Totally. And I think it's a good place to pause for now. We're going to dig into some more of the positive aspects and the potential downsides when we come back. So AI could be changing English right under our noses.
Yeah, it's like we're all swimming in this ocean of language, and AI is subtly changing the currents.
And we might not even realize it until it's too late.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that Maciejewski has some concerns about English 2.0. What are those exactly?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is the potential for linguistic homogenization.
Like losing the incredible diversity of human languages.
Exactly. I mean, what happens to all the nuances, the cultural richness, the different ways of seeing the world that are embedded in different languages if we all end up speaking and writing in this kind of standardized AI-influenced way?
It's a valid concern. I mean, it's like part of what makes language so fascinating is that it's constantly evolving, it's constantly being shaped by the people who use it.
Right, and by the technologies they use. And that brings us to another concern: control.
Control.
Yeah. Who gets to decide how this English 2.0 evolves? Who shapes the algorithms that influence our language? These are big questions, really important questions that we need to be thinking about.
Because it's not just about the words themselves, it's about the values, the assumptions, maybe even the biases that are baked into those algorithms.
Exactly. And those biases can have real-world consequences. Think about how AI is already being used in things like hiring decisions, loan applications, even criminal justice. If the language that those systems are trained on is biased, then the outcomes will be biased too.
It's like we're potentially building our own biases into the very fabric of our communication.
And if we're not careful, those biases could become even more entrenched, even more invisible as AI becomes more sophisticated.
It's a bit of a scary thought. But Maciejewski also talked about something else that's kind of mind-blowing, this idea of bypassing language altogether, using brain-computer interfaces to transmit thoughts directly.
Yeah, that's definitely getting into like sci-fi territory.
For sure. But it's not as far-fetched as it sounds. I mean, there are already researchers working on this kind of technology. So I'm curious, what do you think? What happens to language in a world where we can just beam our thoughts directly into each other's minds?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but it's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, you could imagine a world where communication is instantaneous, totally unfiltered, maybe even more authentic, because you're not having to translate your thoughts into words.
Right.
But on the other hand, it also raises a whole host of ethical questions, like what about privacy? What about the potential for manipulation, for coercion even?
And it's like our thoughts are our most private space. If we start opening up that space to technology, we need to be really, really careful about the potential consequences.
Absolutely. And I think that's true for all of these technologies that we've been talking about. We need to be having these conversations now while these technologies are still being developed.
Yeah.
We need to be thinking about the ethical implications, the social implications, the long-term consequences.
Because once these technologies are out in the world, once they're embedded in our lives, it's going to be much harder to put the genie back in the bottle.
Absolutely.
So if we're thinking about the future of language, it's not just about how AI might change the way we speak or write. It's also about these much bigger questions of power, of control, of what it means to be human in a world that's increasingly shaped by technology.
Exactly. And it's a future that we're all creating together, whether we realize it or not. So it's up to all of us to make sure that it's a future worth creating.
So we've talked about the potential downsides, but are there ways to mitigate those risks? Could we design AI systems that actually help preserve linguistic diversity, that empower users instead of potentially homogenizing how they express themselves?
Yeah, I think that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think it requires a real shift in perspective. Instead of thinking about AI as this thing that's going to replace human expression, we need to think about it as a tool for augmentation.
Augmentation?
Right, for amplifying what makes human language so amazing in the first place. Think about translation, for example.
Yeah, okay.
What if we could use AI to translate between languages, not just accurately, but beautifully? preserving the poetry, the humor, the cultural nuances that are so often lost in translation.
It's like instead of trying to smooth out all the differences between languages, we could use AI to actually appreciate them more.
Exactly. Or think about endangered languages. What if we could use AI to help revitalize those languages, to connect us to the past while enriching the present?
So it's not just about preserving what we have, but also like rediscovering what we've lost.
Exactly. I mean, there's this incredible wealth of knowledge, of culture, of different ways of seeing the world that's embedded in these languages, and AI could help us unlock that.
That's amazing. And it made me think, what about the creative possibilities? Like, what if we could use AI to collaborate with artists, with writers, with musicians?
Oh yeah, that's a really exciting area. I mean, imagine AI helping poets to play with language in new ways, or musicians to create completely new kinds of music.
It's like AI wouldn't be replacing human creativity, it would be amplifying it. It would be pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Right, because ultimately AI is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
It all depends on how we choose to use it.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be having these conversations, be thinking critically about these technologies, and to be advocating for the kind of future that we want to see.
A future where AI helps us to connect more deeply with each other, to understand each other better, and to appreciate the incredible diversity of human language and culture.
I like that. A future where instead of replacing human connection, AI actually helps us to deepen it.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about today. It seems like the future of English, and of all languages really, is far from predetermined. It's a future that we're all creating together, one conversation at a time.